In this video, you will learn how to solve fractional equations. And what I'm going to do is walk you through 3 different examples, each of which will increase in difficulty. So example 1, we have 4 over t minus 1 over 4t equals 3 over 4. Now with any of these with fractions, we can get rid of the fractions by multiplying everything by the least common denominator. When we do that, it's going to make the problem much easier to work with. So our objective for each of these is to first find the least common denominator, and then from there multiply everything by that least common denominator. So if you forget how to find the least common denominator, I would recommend checking out some previous videos on how to do that, because at this point we're assuming we know how to find the least common denominator. So here, looking at each of these denominators, we have t and 4t and 4. So notice we have t's and 4's. Alright, so the question is, how many of each do we take? Well, the most I see is 1 of each. Right, there's only 1 t here, there's 1 4 and 1 t here, and just 1 4 right there. So my least common denominator is going to be 4 and t put together, which is 4t. So then I multiply everything by 4t. So notice we multiply every term by 4t. So when I do that, with the first fraction, the t's will cancel out. So what I have is 4 times 4, which would be 16. The second fraction, 4t, or 4t over 1, will cancel with the 4t in the bottom. So we just have minus and then 1. And then on the right side, we have 4t, and that's 4t over 1, same thing. That will cancel with the 4 in the bottom. So the 4 in the top and the 4 in the bottom cancel out, and that gives me t times 3, or 3t on the right. So I have 16 minus 1 equals 3t. 16 minus 1 is 15, and then divide both sides by 3 to get t equaling 5. So my solution is 5. And notice how much easier this is once we get rid of the fractions. Because at this point, right here, it's just a couple quick steps. Alright, so that's our objective for the next 2 as well, is to find the least common denominator and then multiply everything by that. So next we have 2 over x plus 2 equals 1 over x minus 2. So x plus 2 is one quantity, or one factor, and x minus 2 is another factor. So we see how many of each of these do we take, and the most we see of them is just 1. So we just take 1 of each, put them together to get x plus 2 times x minus 2 as my least common denominator. So then I take both fractions and multiply by the x plus 2 times x minus 2. And that's what we see here and right here. Alright, so we can think of that as being over 1 if we would like. And notice this x plus 2 will cancel with this x plus 2. So I'm left with 2 times x minus 2 over on the left side. On the right side, the x minus 2 will cancel with this x minus 2. That gives me x plus 2 times 1 on the right side. So here I have 2 times x minus 2 equals 1 times x plus 2. And then from here I can solve. So to begin, I can distribute 2 times x, 2 times negative 2 to get 2x minus 4. Alright, and then from here I want to bring x to the same side. So I can bring this x over, and I can do that by subtracting. So when I subtract, the x's will cancel. 2x minus 1x will combine. It gives me 1x. So we have x minus 4 equals 2. I can then add 4 to both sides. So my solution is x equals 6. And by the way, I can double check all of these answers by plugging things back in. And we would notice that here we would have 2 over, and then plug a 6 in for x. So 6 plus 2 would give me 8, equals 1 over, plug a 6 in for x, so we have 6 minus 2, which is 4. 2 eighths equals 1/4. That is a true statement, so therefore we have the correct solution. Okay, one more example, and notice we are increasing in difficulty every time. So to begin, I need to find the least common denominator. Now to do that, I need to factor this denominator right here, the x squared plus x minus 2. So to factor, I'm going to have an x and times x would give me x squared. To get negative 2, I can do a plus 2 minus 1 because those would also add to give me a positive 1 for that middle term. So factor first to determine the least common denominator. So notice we have x minus 1s and we have x plus 2s. Alright, so we have x minus 1s and x plus 2s. The question is, how many of each do we take? Well, we take whichever one has the most of them, and the most we see is just one at a time. Right, here's one x minus 1, here's only just one x plus 2, and then over here there's only one of each, so there's only one at most, so we just take one of each and put them together to get x minus 1 times x plus 2. So then I take that least common denominator and multiply everything by that. So we see that written up right here. So the x minus 1 times x plus 2, we multiply by the first term, multiply that by the second term, then multiply it by the other side as well. And if it's helpful, you can think of that as being over 1. And for the first term, notice the x minus 1's cancel. So I have left x plus 2 times 1, or just x plus 2. For the second term, the x plus 2's cancel. I'm left with x minus 1 times 1, which would just be x minus 1. And then for the other side, the x minus 1 and x plus 2 would cancel with the x minus 1 and x plus 2 in the bottom. That gives me 3 left over. So from here I can solve. We have x plus 2 plus x minus 1 equals 3. X plus x would be 2x, and then 2 minus 1 would give me 1. So I have 2x plus 1 equals 3. I can solve by subtracting 1. So 2x equals 2, and then divide both sides by 2, so x would equal 1. So my solution is going to be 1. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.